November 1944, the Hürtgen Forest, Germany. The air is thick with the scent of damp earth and cordite. A freezing mist clings to the skeletons of fir trees, their branches shattered by artillery. The mud here is not merely ground, it is an entity, deep and grasping, sucking at boots, tires, and hope. Through this grim landscape, a squad of German infantry, their field gray uniforms stained and tattered, moves with the weary caution of men who have survived too much. They are soldiers of the 275th Infantry Division, a formation worn thin by months of relentless American pressure. Suddenly a sound cuts through the forest's morbid silence, not the deep-throated roar of a German staff car, but a higher, angrier mechanical snarl. It is the sound of an American Jeep. The vehicle bounces and slithers along a fire break, its low-slung profile in stark, functional lines, a stark contrast to the primordial chaos of the forest. A burst of machine gun fire from a well-concealed position. The Jeep swerves, its front right tire ripped away. It lurches into a half-collapsed shell crater and stalls. The German squad converges with practiced efficiency. The two American occupants, dazed but unhurt, are quickly disarmed and taken prisoner. The firefight is over. Seconds, now there is only the vehicle. The German sergeant, a veteran of the Eastern Front named Klaus, approaches it with a soldier's curiosity. He runs a hand over the cold green steel of the body. He kicks the thick, knobby tire. Then he opens the driver's side door and slides behind the wheel. His men watch as his expression shifts from professional appraisal to sheer disbelief. Interior is dry, clean. The seats are padded and upholstered in a durable green fabric. The dashboard is a masterpiece of organized simplicity, a large, clear speedometer. Fuel gauge, ignition switch, and little else. No exposed wires, no rough-edged metal. He turns the key, still in the ignition. The engine, a four-cylinder powerhouse, sputters immediately to life. It settles into a smooth, confident idle. He operates the steering wheel, feeling the precise, responsive action of the steering gear. He touches the windshield frame, noting how it can be folded down. He sees the built-in rifle racks, the compartments for tools, the sheer, unadulterated functionality of it all. He looks at his corporal, his face a mask of stunned revelation. This was not just a vehicle, it was a statement of a war fought with tools they could scarcely comprehend, built by an industrial power that seemed to operate in a different world entirely. This single, captured Jeep spoke volumes of the storm that had broken over them. This moment of stunned discovery in a muddy German forest was the end result of a colossal industrial and doctrinal journey that began years earlier and an ocean away. The story of the Jeep does not begin on a battlefield, but in the halls of the U.S. War Department in the late 1930s. The world was rearming. The terrifying success of the German blitzkrieg through Poland in 1939, a tactic reliant on speed and deep penetration by combined arms, sent a clear message to military observers worldwide. The era of static trench warfare was over. The U.S. Army, a modest and largely antiquated force, recognized a critical gap in its order of battle. It possessed heavy trucks for logistics and tanks for assault, but it lacked a lightweight, rugged, four-wheel drive vehicle to serve as a universal implement of war, a machine for command, reconnaissance, and light transport that could go anywhere. The need was formalized in a seemingly simple, yet extraordinarily demanding, request for proposals from the Army's Quartermaster Corps in 1940. The specifications were a testament to the Army's ambition: a vehicle weighing no more than 1,300 pounds, capable of carrying a 600-pound load, with a wheelbase of less than 80 inches, and, most critically, featuring four-wheel drive. It had to be powerful enough to climb steep grades and low enough to be hidden behind a low ridge. This was not a request for a slightly modified civilian car. This was a call for a machine that did not yet exist in the American inventory. The American automotive industry, the greatest industrial engine on the planet, answered the call. Three companies embarked on a frantic, high-stakes competition: American Bantam, a small and struggling manufacturer; Willys Overland; and the Ford Motor Company. The Bantam Company, with its brilliant engineer Karl Probst, delivered the initial blueprint and the first pilot model, the Bantam reconnaissance car, by September 1940, it proved the concept was viable, but the War Department, concerned about Bantam's limited production capacity, shared the designs with Willys and Ford, demanding they create their own pilot models. What followed was an intense period of innovation and refinement. The Willys Quad, designed under the leadership of Delmer Barney Roos, was overweight but boasted a masterpiece of an engine, the Go Devil, a four-cylinder powerplant that produced 60 horsepower, giving it a significant power advantage. The Ford Pygmy was a model of clever, cost-effective engineering. Through a process of standardization, the best features of all three were incorporated into a final, unified design. Willys, with its superior engine, won the initial bulk of the production contract, and the vehicle was standardized as the Willys MB. Ford, to maximize output, was soon contracted to build the vehicle as well, under the designation GPW, with the designs being virtually identical. The name Jeep itself is shrouded in a bit of folklore, likely evolving from the military designation GP for general purpose, but it would soon become a global icon. This was not merely a procurement story, it was the first act of American industrial mobilization for a new kind of war. The Jeep was conceived not as a weapon, but as a force multiplier, a tool to empower the individual soldier and small unit with unprecedented mobility. Its birth was a direct, calculated response to the new, terrifying tempo of warfare as demonstrated by the Wehrmacht. While the Germans had pioneered the theory of mobile war, America was preparing to execute it on a scale the world had never seen, built not on individual genius, but on systematized, democratic production. This American drive for standardized, mass-produced utility stood in stark contrast to the parallel development of light military vehicles within the very nation whose tactics had inspired its creation. While American industry marshaled itself around a single, unified design, the German approach to military mobility was fundamentally different. Germany did not lack for light vehicles. In fact, it fielded a range of ingenious and capable machines, but they reflected the underlying philosophy of the Nazi war economy, a focus on technical excellence and specialization, often at the expense of standardization and mass production. The most direct counterpart to the Jeep was the Kübelwagen, or bucket car, produced by Volkswagen. Designed by Ferdinand Porsche, the Type 82 Kübelwagen was a marvel of simple engineering, based on the strength-through-joy car, the people's car that would become the Volkswagen Beetle. It was air-cooled, rear-engined, and incredibly lightweight. Its lack of a complex four-wheel drive system was offset by its low weight and clever use of a ZF self-locking differential, which allowed it to traverse surprisingly difficult terrain. It was reliable, easy to maintain, and cheap to produce. Alongside it served the Kettenkrad, a bizarre yet effective tracked motorcycle, and a variety of light personnel carriers from Opel and Stower. But herein lay the core of the divergence. Germany produced multiple types of light vehicles from multiple manufacturers with different parts, different engines, and different maintenance requirements. This created a logistical labyrinth for the Wehrmacht's supply corps, problem that would only magnify as the war dragged on and Germany's resources stretched to breaking point. Furthermore, the German military command structure influenced vehicle design. The Kübelwagen was, first and foremost, a transporter of personnel and a runabout for junior officers. It was a tool within a rigid hierarchy. The American Jeep, by contrast, was designed from the outset to be a platform. It was a blank slate. It could be a command car for a general, an ambulance for medics, a reconnaissance vehicle for scouts, a mount for a .30 or .50 caliber machine gun, a wire layer, a railway inspection car. Its versatility was baked into its very DNA, reflecting a more flexible, decentralized command philosophy where junior officers and even non-commissioned officers were expected to show initiative. By the time the first American soldiers landed in North Africa in 1942, the Jeep was already a ubiquitous part of their kit. It was not a luxury, it was as essential as the M1 Garand rifle. It was the thread that connected the front line to the supply depot, the commander to his units, the medic to the wounded. It was a product of the American arsenal of democracy, a term coined not by a general, but by President Franklin D. Roosevelt, encapsulating a national effort to outproduce the Axis. The Jeep was a physical manifestation of that promise, not a handcrafted dueling sword, but a mass-produced, unbreakable utility knife. This fundamental difference in industrial philosophy and military doctrine set the stage for the moment of collision, when the German soldier in the Huichin forest laid his hands on the captured Willys MB. He was not just encountering a new piece of equipment, he was touching the output of a system entirely alien to him, a system whose sheer productive capacity and focus on practical utility would soon overwhelm his own. This single vehicle opened a window onto multiple, intersecting angles of the war, each revealing a different facet of the conflict. For the German soldier, the Kübelwagen was a familiar piece of machinery. It was Spartan, utilitarian, and reflected the resource-constrained environment in which it was built. Its body was a simple, stamped metal tub, the bucket that gave it its name. It had no doors, its folding windshield was basic, its canvas top was a flimsy shelter at best. Inside, the dashboard was minimal, often just a speedometer and a few switches. The air-cooled engine was exposed in the rear. It was, in essence, a militarized civilian car stripped to its bare essentials. This was the baseline for his understanding of a light military vehicle. When he encountered the captured Jeep, his sensory experience was one of profound dissonance. The first shock was tactile. The body was smoother, the seams tighter. He would open the door, a simple thing, but a luxury his Kübelwagen did not possess. He would sink into a padded, upholstered seat, a stark contrast to the hard, flat bench of his own vehicle. The dashboard was a panel of purposeful intent, a large, clear speedometer, fuel gauge, an ammeter, and ignition switch, all laid out with a clarity that spoke of thoughtful design. Starting the engine produced another jolt. The Willys Go Devil engine had a distinctive, throaty, and confident rumble. It felt robust, powerful, compared to the Kübelwagen's more modest powerplant. The Jeep's engine promised and delivered greater torque and hill-climbing ability. The German soldier would note the four-wheel drive lever, a feature his own vehicle lacked, understanding immediately the superior traction it offered in the very mud and snow that defined the European theater. But the true psychological impact came from the details that spoke of a different industrial psychology, the standardized tools stored in their specific compartments, the built-in rifle racks, the fact that the windshield frame was not just a windshield frame, but a housing for a vacuum-powered windshield wiper motor. Every component felt over-engineered, not for show, but for relentless, dependable service. It was not just a vehicle, it was a mobile, all-terrain utility room. This was not the product of a nation scraping by unlimited resources, but of one that could afford to build immense capability and resilience into even its smallest, most disposable tools. For the veteran German soldier, this was a tangible, chilling data point in the calculation of his nation's chances. The Jeep was a triumph of production, not just design. The philosophy behind its manufacture was as revolutionary as the vehicle itself. The American approach was one of ruthless standardization and interchangeability. The Willys MB and Ford GPW were, for all practical purposes, identical. A part manufactured by Willys would fit perfectly on a Ford-built Jeep and vice versa. This was a logistical miracle that simplified supply chains to an unprecedented degree. The production lines, particularly Ford's colossal River Rouge plant, were monuments to efficiency. The process was broken down into simple, repetitive tasks, allowing for rapid assembly by a workforce that included thousands of women and men new to complex manufacturing. The goal was not to build the perfect vehicle by hand, but to build hundreds of thousands of good enough vehicles with machine-like consistency. By the end of the war, over 640,000 Jeeps had been produced, a number that dwarfed the combined output of all German light military vehicles. This scale was a direct function of the arsenal of democracy ethos. It was a system built on abundance, not scarcity. The Jeep's design incorporated cost-saving measures, but never at the expense of core functionality or durability. It used steel, rubber, and copper with a profligacy that would have been unthinkable in Germany, where strategic Materials were constantly rationed, the very existence of the Jeep in such staggering numbers was a silent, crushing argument in the war of production. Every one of the 640,000 Jeeps built was a mobile advertisement for American industrial might. Statement that for every tank, plane, and truck the Axis could build, the Allies could build 10 and the tools to support them all. This manufacturing philosophy, which produced such a robust and versatile tool, was made physically manifest in the Jeep's very machinery, a collection of components that, when compared directly to its German counterparts, revealed a stark technological divergence. To fully understand the German soldier's shock, one must place the two vehicles side by side, not as icons, but as collections of engineering solutions. The Willys MB and the Volkswagen Kübelwagen were both brilliant answers to the same military question, but they were born from diametrically opposed industrial realities. The heart of any vehicle is its engine. The Jeep-esque Go Devil was a four-cylinder, liquid-cooled side-valve engine displacing 2.2 liters. It produced 60 horsepower. It was heavy, simple, and built to withstand immense punishment. Its torque curve was broad and forgiving. The Kübelwagen's engine was an air-cooled, flat four, also of 985 cc, producing just 23.5 horsepower. It was a masterpiece of lightweight efficiency derived from the civilian Volkswagen. It was reliable in a wide range of climates, but it lacked the power for demanding tasks like towing or high-speed cross-country travel. The Jeep S engine was a workhorse. The Kübelwagen S was a commuter adapted for war. The most significant differentiator was the drivetrain. The Jeep featured a robust, gear-driven transfer case that provided a dedicated four-wheel drive system with a low range gear. This gave it unparalleled traction in mud, sand, and snow. The Kübelwagen, with its rear-engine, rear-wheel drive layout, relied on its light weight, a self-locking differential, and specially designed tires to avoid getting stuck. It was a clever, cost-effective solution that worked surprisingly well, but it had its physical limits. In the deep, glutinous mud of the Russian front or the Italian mountains, the Kübelwagen would eventually be defeated, while the Jeep, with all four wheels driving, could often power through. The chassis and body told a similar story. The Jeep used a rigid, box-section steel frame. Its body was bolted on, and every panel was designed for easy replacement. The Kübelwagen used a central tubular chassis with a floorpan, a lighter but less rigid design. The Jeep's body, while not luxurious, was fully enclosed, with doors and a proper dashboard. The Kübelwagen's body was essentially a stamped metal tub, open to the elements. Technologically, the Jeep was the more complex, more capable, and more resource-intensive machine. It was a product of an industry that could afford to over-engineer for guaranteed performance. The Kübelwagen was a product of an industry that had to cleverly under-engineer to conserve precious materials. The design of the Jeep reflected a fundamental aspect of American military doctrine: the decentralization of command and the empowerment of the junior leader. In the U.S. Army, a Jeep was not reserved for senior officers. A platoon leader, a sergeant, even a squad of engineers or a team of medics could be assigned one. It was a tool of initiative, allowing small units to act with speed and independence, to reconnoiter, to flank, to communicate, and to adapt to the fluid chaos of the battlefield. A captain could use his Jeep to personally visit his company's forward positions, assess the terrain, and adjust his tactics on the fly, all within minutes. A machine gun team could dismount their M Browning from its tripod, mount it on the Jeep's pintle, and create an instant mobile fire support platform. This flexibility was a force multiplier. The Jeep was the physical embodiment of Auftragstaktik, mission-type tactics, better than the Germans themselves could often manage with their more rigid vehicle hierarchy. In contrast, the German system, while theoretically believing in decentralized initiative, often saw its best equipment, the sophisticated armored cars, the Halftracks, allocated to elite, specialized units like the Panzer and SS divisions. The standard infantry division made do with what was available, which was often the Kübelwagen, a vehicle seen more as a transport than a combat platform. The Jeep, therefore, was not just a piece of equipment, it was a symbol of a more fluid, less hierarchical military structure. It put immense capability into the hands of the many, not the privileged few. This democratization of mobility would have been viscerally apparent to the German soldier, who saw just how many of these vehicles the Americans had and how freely they were used by all ranks and branches. This multifaceted shock, human, industrial, technological, and doctrinal, would culminate in a single, decisive moment. The initial capture and inspection were just the prelude. The true turning point came when the implications of this discovery sank in, not as a curiosity, but as an omen of inevitable defeat. The German sergeant, Klaus, remains behind the wheel of the captured jeep. The initial wave of stunned curiosity begins to recede, replaced by a more methodical, professional assessment. He signals to his men. Two of them grasp the tubular steel bumper. Another feature his Kubelwagen lacked, and with a grunt, they lift the front of the jeep off the ground with surprising ease. He then engages the four-wheel drive system. Feeling the positive click of the lever, he gets out and inspects the front axle. He sees the driven hubs, the robust differential. This was no theoretical feature, it was a mechanical reality that explained how this American vehicle had navigated the Huitschen's infamous mud where so many other vehicles had foundered. His corporal, a former auto mechanic from Cologne named Hans, pops the hood. The engine compartment is a model of accessible logical layout. The Go Devil engine is right there, its simple components easy to see and reach. He traces the wiring, notes the single sturdy carburetor, the straightforward cooling system. He compares it mentally to the more complex, tightly packed engines of German staff cars. This was an engine designed to be fixed by a soldier in a muddy field with a basic toolkit, not by a master mechanic in a pristine garage. Its simplicity was a form of sophistication his own army had often overlooked in its pursuit of technical marvels. Another soldier explores the rear of the vehicle. He finds the compartment under the rear seat, opening it to find a complete set of tools, each one secured in a custom fit bracket, a jack, a axe, a shovel. He notes the jerrycan mounts on the rear, the towing hooks, the pintle mount for a machine gun. This was not a vehicle that had been adapted for military use. It had been conceived for it from the ground up. Every cubic inch of space had a purpose. Every feature, from the fold-down windshield to the blackout drive lights, spoke of a deep, practical understanding of a soldier's needs in combat. The sergeant steps back, his eyes scanning the vehicle from bumper to bumper. The drizzle continues, beating on the jeep's smooth, painted surfaces. He looks at his own men, their faces gaunt, their uniforms a collection of repaired tears and ingrained dirt. They are equipped with a mix of Mauser rifles and captured PPSH-41, their ammunition low, their rations scant. They are the embodiment of the German war machine in late 1944, tactically skilled, resilient, but operating on a fraying logistical thread. And then the realization strikes him with the force of a physical blow. This jeep, this one perfectly functional machine, was not a rare prize. It was a single drop in a vast, endless river of equipment flowing from the west. He had seen them before, of course, dashing across fields, swarming in the rear areas, but he had never touched one, never interrogated it. Now he understood. This vehicle was not just better than his Kubelwagen in some aspects. It represented a system of war that could replace this vehicle without a second thought. If it broke down, they would simply bring another. If it was destroyed, 10 more were on their way. The luxury was not in the upholstery or the doors, it was in the luxury of plenty, the luxury of waste, the luxury of not having to make agonizing choices about where to allocate a few precious kilograms of steel or rubber. This single captured jeep became a crystal-clear window into the inevitable. The turning point was not a battle on a map, but a battle of perception fought in the mind of a veteran soldier. The war was no longer a contest of wills between soldiers. It was a contest of factories, and his side had already lost. This dawning comprehension, born in the silence of a damp forest, would soon be echoed by the thunderous reality of the advancing Allied juggernaut, a force whose very mobility was defined by the machine now sitting silently in the German lines. The sergeant's quiet epiphany in the forest was a microcosm of a macro-level shift occurring across the entire Western Front in the latter half of 1944, the capture of Individual jeeps by German units became increasingly common as the Allied advance gained momentum. Each of these encounters served as a data point, confirming terrifying new reality. For the German High Command, intelligence reports and after-action assessments began to paint a picture that went beyond tactical encounters. They spoke of an enemy whose logistical tail was not a fragile chain, but a robust, multi-laned highway. The ubiquity of the Jeep was a key indicator. It meant that every American infantry battalion, every artillery battery, every headquarters was endowed with a level of organic mobility that the Wehrmacht could only dream of for its own frontline troops. This was not a qualitative assessment of one vehicle being better than another. It was a quantitative assessment of a system that could saturate the battlefield with capability. The climax of this understanding was not a single event, but a cascading series of realizations. It was the artillery spotter, unable to call fire on a lone Jeep because a dozen more would appear moments later. It was the Panzer crew witnessing American infantry redeploying en masse in Jeeps to shore up a threatened sector faster than their own infantry could march. It was the logistician seeing photographs of captured Jeeps and calculating the industrial man-hours and raw materials represented by just one, then multiplying that by the hundreds of thousands known to exist. The Jeep, in its relentless, overwhelming numbers, shattered the German perception. American softness, a lingering stereotype from the early days in North Africa. The soldiers who operated this machine were not coddled, they were empowered, they were given a tool that multiplied their effectiveness, conserved their energy, and increased their chances of survival. The luxury of the Jeep was, in the final calculation, a profound form of military efficiency. It kept men drier, warmer, and more mobile, which meant they were more effective combatants for longer periods. The turning point, therefore, was the moment the Jeep ceased to be viewed as a mere piece of captured equipment and became recognized as a symbol of an insurmountable asymmetry. The German soldier, for all his courage and skill, was fighting a system that could produce and replace complex machinery with the same ease with which his own nation could produce a loaf of black bread. The Jeep was the proof that the war had evolved from a clash of armies to a clash of entire civilizations' industrial and philosophical cores, and one side had built its core around the principles of mass, utility, and democratic distribution. The moment of capture and inspection was the climax of the technological and human story, but the aftermath of this realization, the concrete consequences for the men who fought and the world they would inherit, would define the next half-century. The dawning comprehension experienced by soldiers like Sergeant Klaus in the Huichin forest was a psychological wound that bled into the very morale of the German fighting man. A German military intelligence report from early 1945, assessing the morale of its own troops, noted a growing sense of material inferiority that was as demoralizing as enemy air superiority. The report cited the ubiquitous American Jeep as a frequent example used by frontline soldiers to illustrate the hopelessness of their situation. It was not the Tiger tank or the P-51 Mustang that felt most immediate and personal, but this small, unassuming vehicle that seemed to be everywhere, doing everything. It was a constant, grinding reminder that they were not just outnumbered, but outproduced and out-equipped at the most fundamental level. The practical consequences of this disparity were measured in blood and territory. The Jeep's role in the Red Ball Express, the colossal non-stop trucking convoy that supplied the Allied breakout from Normandy, was critical, while the heavy trucks carried the bulk tonnage. It was the Jeeps that kept the operation fluid, ferrying dispatches, troubleshooting breakdowns, and providing mobility for military police navigating the chaotic routes. This logistical miracle, which sustained the Allied advance at a pace Germans could not match, would have been impossible without the Jeep's versatility. In the medical services, the Jeep ambulance allowed for the rapid evacuation of wounded soldiers from the very edge of the battlefield to field hospitals, dramatically increasing survival rates. A U.S. Army study concluded that the speed of evacuation provided by vehicles like the Jeep was a significant factor in reducing mortality from major trauma. For the German Army, the opposite was true. Their logistical system, reliant on a diverse Fleet of vehicles, a dwindling number of horses, and shattered railways was collapsing. Under the strain, the capture of American Jeeps became, for some German units, a matter of practical necessity. There are numerous documented instances of German reconnaissance units, particularly in the chaotic Battle of the Bulge, using captured Jeeps to move behind American lines, their familiar silhouette providing a moment of deceptive safety. But this act of appropriation was the ultimate testament to the Jeeps' superiority. The German soldier was, in effect, voting with his trigger finger, abandoning his own issued equipment for the enemy's because it simply worked better. This was not an ideological shift. It was a brutal, pragmatic admission of defeat in the contest of engineering and production. The sheer numerical advantage was a tidal wave. The over 640,000 Jeeps produced by the United States stood in stark contrast to the approximately 50,000 Kubelwagens built by Germany. This ratio of nearly 13-to-1 for a single class of vehicle was a microcosm of the entire war economy. The Jeep was not a rare, prized asset to be hoarded at headquarters. It was a consumable, a disposable tool of war. American commanders could take risks with them, send them on dangerous missions, and accept losses that would have been crippling to a German unit. This freedom of action, granted by the sheer volume of production, created an operational tempo that the slower, more methodical German war machine could not sustain. The initial shock of capturing a single Jeep thus rippled outwards, influencing morale, tactics, and the very logistics of defeat, while simultaneously cementing the Jeep's legendary status among the Allies who depended on it. The Jeep story did not end with the German surrender in May 1945. Its legacy was just beginning. Even as the guns fell silent, the Jeep continued to work. It became the primary vehicle of occupation, its familiar shape a symbol of the new American presence. In a shattered Europe, it was used by military police, by engineers clearing rubble, by administrators restoring civil order. For the conquered populations, the sight of the Jeep, so different from the German vehicles that had once patrolled their streets, was a tangible sign that the war was truly over. For the Allied soldiers, the Jeep was more than a vehicle. It was a companion that had shared their hardships. It was awarded unit citations, painted with nicknames and pin-ups, and regarded with a fondness rarely afforded to mere equipment. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, the supreme Allied commander, would later place the Jeep in a trinity of equipment that won the war, alongside the Dakota transport aircraft and the landing ship tank LSD. This was not an exaggeration. The Jeep had become the central nervous system of the American Army, a physical network that enabled command, control, and compassion on an unprecedented scale. The statistical reality of its production provided the cold, hard data behind the anecdotal shock of the German soldier. The 640,000-plus Jeeps built by Willys and Ford represented not just a number but a consumption of resources. They embodied millions of tons of steel, vast quantities of rubber, and countless man-hours of labor, resources that Germany, blockaded and resource-starved, had to allocate with agonizing care. The Jeep was a rolling testament to this economic imbalance. Its luxury was, in the final analysis, the luxury of overwhelming material advantage. In the aftermath of war, tens of thousands of surplus Jeeps were sold off or given to Allied nations under aid programs. They became agricultural tools, fire engines, and the first vehicles for police forces across Europe and Asia. The civilian model, the CJ2A, launched in 1945, created the entire concept of the recreational off-road vehicle and evolved directly into the brand we know today as Jeep. The design was so perfect, so fundamentally right, that its basic formula, a box-section chassis, a rugged four-cylinder engine, and selectable four-wheel drive, remained largely unchanged for decades. The captured German Kubelwagen, by contrast, faded into obscurity, a capable vehicle. In its own right, it was inextricably linked to the regime that built it. There was no global future for the Volkswagen as a military vehicle. Its resurrection would come in its original pre-war form, the Beetle, a symbol of peace and German economic recovery. Whirled away from the mud and death of the Eastern Front, the Jeep, however, marched On serving in Korea, Vietnam, and in the militaries of countless nations, its DNA visible. In every light tactical vehicle since, the encounter in the Huichin forest was not an endpoint but the beginning of a global legacy. The story of the stunned German soldier and the captured Jeep is more than a simple anecdote of wartime surprise. It is a profound lesson in the nature of modern conflict, told not in the grand halls of power, but in the mud of a common battlefield. The true luxury inside the Jeep was not the padded seats or the waterproof canvas roof. It was the luxury of a philosophy, a belief in utility over prestige, in standardization over individuality, in empowering the many rather than privileging the few. The Jeep was a product of a society that trusted its citizens with robust, effective tools. It was conceived by a democracy and built by an economy that valued output over ornamentation. Its genius was its relentless focus on solving problems, a reflection of the pragmatic, optimistic spirit of the nation that created it. In contrast, the German war machine, for all its tactical brilliance and engineering marvels, was ultimately constrained by a system built on hierarchy, scarcity, and ideological rigidity. When that German sergeant sat in the driver's seat, feeling the solidity of the steering and hearing the confident idle of the engine, he was confronting the physical manifestation of this divide. He was touching the output of a system that could afford to care for its soldiers with such thoughtful, durable equipment. The Jeep, therefore, stands as an enduring icon. It represents the idea that the most decisive weapon in any conflict is not always the most powerful, but the most reliable, not the most complex, but the most understood, not a jewel to be admired, but a tool to be used. It was, and remains, a testament to the simple, unstoppable power of a good idea, perfectly executed and built in numbers too vast to comprehend.